Chapter 1: Wings in the Mist. That morning, the mountains were swallowed by a sea of thick fog, as if the entire sky had poured down to the earth. Winding trails appeared and vanished like spreading ink stains, dissolving into the vast white void. From afar came the sound of wind, not the gentle whisper of dawn, but sharp, cutting gusts that hissed through rocky crevices, carrying a cold, damp bite that seeped deep into the skin. Out of that gray, blurred canvas, a shadowed pair of wings emerged. A large hawk, its breast feathers a dark brown streaked with gold, was gliding low. It did not soar high like most free-ranging predators. Its wings tilted, circling again and again as if anchored to a spot on the ground below. The heavy beat of its wings echoed in the dense, wet air, sometimes drowned out by wind sweeping across the mountain's flank. Anyone looking up would see it immediately. This was not the leisurely flight of a bird searching for food. It was tracking something. A faint human voice slipped through the fog, hazy and distant like a dream. Someone was calling, the sound breaking apart and vanishing into the empty expanse. Then suddenly, the scene shifted, as if a camera panned downward through the thinning mist near the ground. There, a small child was stumbling along a muddy mountain path. Tiny shoes, caked with thick mud, dragged heavily with each step. The jacket hung askew, the zipper halfway undone, revealing a thin sweater soaked through. The child's cheeks were flushed from the cold, but the eyes seemed unfocused, as if unsure of where they were. No crying, no laughter, only the sound of small, unsteady footsteps along a lonely path. High above, the hawk still followed, each wide arc slicing through the mist, its sharp eyes never leaving the small figure. Every so often, it tilted its head, as though watching something beyond the image itself, as though weighing a decision. They say that wild animals and humans rarely cross paths unless there is a reason. But that morning, in a world where every sound was muffled into silence, a question began to take shape, pounding like a drum in the hearts of those who might witness it. Why was a hawk shadowing a child in the remote mountains? And in its eyes, what was it trying to say? Chapter 2: The Strange Object. Sarah Miller was used to the morning chill of the mountains, but today, the wind cutting through the thick fog made her shiver in a different way. She was a rescue volunteer, part of the search team that had been combing the area since the previous night after word spread across town that a young boy had gone missing. A massive storm had swept through 2 days earlier, causing landslides along many of the trails, and any child wandering into this area would face real danger. She stood at the edge of a slope, eyes fixed on the milky white void ahead. Just a few dozen yards away, everything was swallowed by the fog. The radio on her shoulder crackled faintly with the voices of her teammates. But the signal faded in and out. Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight in her hand, even though daylight had already broken, because in places like this, artificial light was sometimes the only guide. When she looked up, she noticed a dark shape in the air, a hawk, wings spread wide, circling over a particular patch of land. At first, she assumed it was hunting a rabbit or a field mouse, perfectly normal. Wildlife carried on with its business regardless of human presence, but something made her watch a little longer. The circles it traced were too precise. This was not the swoop and strike pattern of a predator, but a repeated orbit, as though it were marking a spot. Sarah frowned. The area beneath the hawk's flight path led toward the eastern ravine, a place she knew few people, let alone children, would ever dare to go. Curiosity pushed her forward, her boots crunching through wet dirt and loose rock. Above her, the sound of wing beats blended with the wind and the thudding of her own heartbeat. Then, beside a large boulder, she saw it, a bright red wool scarf, soaked and muddied, caught beneath a broken branch. She bent down, pulling it free from the wet leaves. The knit was thick, handmade, the edges frayed slightly from scraping against stone. In an instant, an image from the team's emergency briefing flashed in her mind, a photograph of a brown-haired boy wearing this exact scarf. Ethan, 6 years old, missing for nearly 18 hours. Sarah's chest tightened. She scanned the area for more signs. Then, lifting her gaze, she saw the hawk still there, still circling above the same place. It tilted its wings, shifted direction, and dipped lower, almost as if ensuring she noticed it. For a few seconds, Sarah's eyes met the birds through the mist. A strange shiver ran down her spine. This was no coincidence. It was waiting. Her training told her to call in immediately, mark the location, and wait for the others. But something stronger than reason urged her to follow the bird. She tucked the scarf into her coat pocket and stepped toward the direction it had leaned into. And in that moment, she realized, if she was wrong, it would be nothing but a pointless climb. But if she was right, maybe, just maybe, this hawk was leading her to the boy. Sarah took a deep breath and kept going. Chapter 3: Guiding Through the Mist. Sarah tightened the straps of her backpack and stepped deeper into the mist that closed in around her. Beads of moisture clung to her eyelashes, making her vision even more blurred. Each breath came out as a puff of white vapor, dissolving just inches in front of her before melting into the endless haze. Above, the hawk still circled, the beat of its wings echoing like a distant drum, sometimes torn apart by the wind into sharp, cold notes. Unlike the other times she had watched birds of prey, Sarah noticed this one was moving in a strange rhythm. It was not sweeping the whole forest the way hawks usually did, but instead keeping to a single line of flight, gliding forward a few hundred yards, which is about a few hundred meters, then stopping on a bare branch and turning its head to look back. Each time Sarah closed the distance, it would take off again, veering toward the next point. Like a silent guide, underfoot, the path narrowed, the ground turned into a layer of mud mixed with loose stones, crisscrossed with exposed roots like twisted cords. To her left was a sheer rock wall coated in deep green moss, slick as if greased. To her right was a steep drop swallowed by fog, the bottom invisible. A sudden gust blew back toward her, carrying the damp, earthy scent of soil and rotting leaves. Sarah crouched, her flashlight beam sweeping across the ground, and her heart gave a sharp thud. A small footprint, the edges of the mud had begun to dry, but the center was still damp. The toes pointed forward, and beside it was a long drag mark, as if the maker's legs were heavy with exhaustion or had slipped. She knelt, placing her hand near the ground, feeling both warmth and cold against her skin. She looked up for the hawk, but it had vanished into the thick fog. Sarah drew a deep breath, stood straight, and listened. Beyond the howl of the wind, she caught something else, faint and delicate, like a single thread vibrating in the air, the sound of crying. Not clear, but enough to send every muscle in her body into alert. "Ethan, can you hear me?" Sarah called out, her voice breaking apart in the mist. No answer. The crying stopped as suddenly as it had come. She gripped the flashlight tighter and pushed forward. Then, a few yards ahead, she spotted something lying in the wet grass, a small wooden toy boat. Broken in half, one half was darkened with mud, the other half still showed its intricate carvings. She recognized it instantly, a rare handcrafted toy, almost certainly the one Ethan always carried, maybe a gift from someone special. She slipped the toy into her coat pocket, feeling as if she were gathering fragments of a story yet to be told. The hawk appeared again, this time from the opposite direction, gliding over her head before dipping low and flying ahead. Its posture seemed to urge her, hurry. But the path ahead was no smooth ground. A narrow gorge lay before her, its walls cold and slick, as if coated in a thin layer of ice. Water from the previous day's rain still dripped in slow, echoing drops into the darkness below. Sarah braced one hand on the rock, moving step by careful step. Any slip could send her tumbling down the slope. The wind began to strengthen, lashing sideways and leaving droplets clinging to her collar. The mist was now so thick that the hawk's shadow was little more than a blurred shape, but it was the only shape that held its form. Unlike the false silhouettes of trees the fog often created, suddenly, another mark appeared on the path, a fresh footprint, smaller than the one before. Right at the edge, the mud just beyond had been scraped away, revealing roots underneath. Sarah pictured the boy stumbling, grabbing at the edge for balance, and then moving on. She gritted her teeth and quickened her pace, no longer caring about the mud splattering her pant legs. With each step, her heartbeat seemed to match the rhythm of the wing beats ahead. Slow, then quick, but never gone. She felt she was being guided not just by a bird, but by something urgent and unseen, something larger than animal instinct or human will. At a bend in the trail, wind surged out of the gorge so hard it nearly pushed her back. She bent forward, clinging to a leaning tree, breathing hard. When she looked up, She saw the hawk had lowered its flight, sweeping just above the ground before vanishing behind a large outcrop of rock. Sarah knew the terrain beyond that rock, a tangled mix of small cliffs, exposed roots, and loose stones. If Ethan was there, any wrong step could be disastrous. She moved closer, every sense strung tight as a bowstring. Just before she rounded the rock, she heard it again, this time clearer, ragged breathing, mixed with sobs. She whispered, "Hang on, Ethan, I am almost there." Chapter 4. Beyond the fog. Sarah slid along the damp rock wall, her gloves quickly soaking through. Every crack and ledge became her only grip against the invisible drop below. The smell of moss and wet earth filled her lungs, heavy and close. From somewhere ahead, the wind whistled through the gorge, echoing in layers, like the long, drawn-out howl of something unseen. Clearing the jagged rock, Sarah froze. In front of her was a small patch of earth jutting out over the edge. On it, Ethan sat curled up. The boy was thin inside a soaked sweater, knees pulled to his chest, small hands clutching the fabric. His legs were scraped and streaked with dried blood. His face was pale, lips tinged blue from the cold. His eyes were wide but unfocused, the look of someone too exhausted to react. Not far from him, the hawk stood on the damp ground, wings folded but ready to open. It did not move, only tilting its head to watch Ethan, then shifting its gaze to Sarah. Its golden eyes were like shards of glass catching the dim light of the foggy morning. No sound came from it, but its presence felt like a warning. "Do not frighten the boy." "Ethan," Sarah called softly, her voice carried by the wind, both gentle and urgent. The boy flinched slightly, blinking once, then lowering his gaze again. The hawk tilted its head, the feathers along its neck rippling in the cold gust. Sarah crouched, keeping her eyes level with his. "It is all right, Ethan. I am here to take you home." She took a step forward and felt the ground soften under her boot, the dangerous give of eroded earth. The dirt beneath her seemed to loosen grain by grain, crumbling into the unseen space below. The radio on her shoulder crackled to life, the words broken and faint. "Sarah, location, near." She quickly covered the microphone. She did not want any sudden noise to startle Ethan. Then, from far away, a rescue siren sounded, faint and broken, but enough to shatter the stillness. Ethan's eyes lifted slightly, his breath uneven. Sarah moved half a step closer, stopping when she saw the ground give way near his feet. One wrong move and he could lose his balance. The hawk spread its wings wide, the feathers arching like a shield against the wind. It stepped closer to Ethan, as if blocking any gust that might sweep him toward the edge. "Ethan, look at me." Sarah extended her hand, palm open, facing upward. "We are going to leave here together." The boy shifted slightly, his eyes fixed on her hand. Droplets fell from his hair into the small puddle beneath him. The wind caught the corner of Sarah's pocket, revealing the bright red scarf. Ethan's eyes brightened faintly. He recognized it. Sarah seized the moment, speaking gently. "I found your scarf. Now, take my hand." The boy hesitated, then slowly reached out. The instant his fingers touched hers, she pulled him firmly into her arms. The patch of ground where he had been sitting collapsed, vanishing into the mist. Footsteps pounded behind her. Figures in orange rescue jackets appeared, ropes in hand, headlamps cutting through the fog. The hawk suddenly launched into the air, circling wide above Sarah and Ethan, the powerful sound of its wings tearing through the wind. In a blink, it vanished into the white void, as if it had never been there. Ethan clung tightly to Sarah's hand. The rescue workers quickly wrapped him in a blanket, checked his injuries, and began leading them away from the edge. Sarah glanced back toward where the hawk had disappeared. There was only fog and wind now, but in her heart, the question would remain for the rest of her life. Why had a wild creature been there? And why had it chosen to stay beside a child for such a long, perilous journey? Chapter 5. The moment after the rain. The rain had stopped long ago, but moisture still clung to every blade of grass, every leaf. The thick fog had begun to lift, revealing stretches of deep green forest soaking in the pale light of midday. The rescue team's footsteps were steady but urgent, boots sinking into wet mud, mingling with the sound of labored breathing. Sarah walked slower than the rest, one hand holding Ethan close, the other gripping the safety line wrapped around his waist. He remained silent, his tiny hand clasped hers so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Sarah could feel the faint tremors running through him, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, the lingering fear of having been left alone in the wilderness for hours. They stopped to rest in a small clearing, where sunlight had just broken through the dripping canopy. One of the team members pulled a warm water flask and a thin blanket from a backpack. Sarah sat down, wrapping the blanket around Ethan, trying to gently pry his fingers from her hand, but he would not let go. "It is all right," she whispered, her gaze softening. "I am not going anywhere." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to confirm something unspoken. Then he gave the smallest nod, but his hand stayed locked in hers. As the team prepared to lead Ethan down the mountain, Sarah looked up. The sky had begun to clear, the gray clouds pushed back by the wind, revealing the first patches of blue. There was no sign of the hawk. She searched again, scanning each treetop and gap of sky, but all that remained was open air. One of the team asked, "You said a bird led you to him?" Sarah smiled but did not answer right away. She knew that to anyone who had not been there, the story would sound like something embroidered into legend. How could she describe its eyes, the way it circled with deliberate calculation? How could she explain that in the cold fog and wind, its presence had made her believe she was being guided to exactly what she needed to find? "Yes, a hawk," she said at last, her voice slow, as though speaking of an old friend. No one asked further. Perhaps they thought it was coincidence. But Sarah did not. When the group moved on, light spilled across the mountainsides. Water droplets on the leaves sparkled like glass. And somewhere, the song of birds carried through the air, announcing the start of a new day. Though for Sarah, it marked the end of a journey. Ethan kept holding her hand until they stepped out of the forest. On the drier ground, their footprints lay side by side, one large, one small, unbroken. Sarah knew that though time might blur many memories, this moment would remain vivid for them both. And the hawk, it had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving a space no one else could fill. That lingering question would never have a complete answer. How had it known the way here? And why had it chosen to help a human child? All she could do was lift her gaze to the clear sky, smiling through her tears, as if sending thanks to a pair of wings that had disappeared into the morning mist. Chapter 6. Wings of Trust. The next day, the mountain was an entirely different being. No more suffocating fog, no more wind howling through the rocky crevices. Sunlight poured across the slopes, glinting off the lingering drops of dew, turning them into countless shimmering crystals. The same trail as yesterday was still there, but now it felt warmer, stripped of its menace. Sarah returned alone. She carried no radio, no team, only a small camera, as a way to capture something from the place that had witnessed such an unlikely story. She walked slowly, noting every detail. The patch of soft earth where the boy had sat, the snapped trunk of a fallen tree, the footprints, hers and Ethan's, now blurred under fallen leaves. At the edge of the rock outcrop, the wind still blew, but it was gentler now, as if the previous day's storm had been only a bad dream. Sarah tilted her head back to the deep blue sky. No shadow of wings, yet she stayed, waiting. Deep down, she believed that somewhere, the hawk was still flying, watching, and that when needed, it would return. She thought about what had happened, an invisible thread connecting a human and a wild creature. With no promise, no language, only trust and understanding, a bird of prey, often seen as a symbol of strength and solitude, had become a guide and a guardian. Sarah understood that some bonds could not be measured by logic. They were forged in rare moments, when one being, no matter its species, recognized the fragility of another life and chose to act. That empathy needed no words, yet it was powerful enough to change the ending of a story. On her way back down, Sarah paused again, glancing toward the mountain. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a shadow slice across the sky, just a fleeting shape. Gone behind distant trees, she could not tell if it was real or only the vision of a heart that wanted to believe. But she smiled, a quiet, peaceful smile. Tomorrow, next month, or years from now, the memory of those wings would remain. It was not just the story of a successful rescue, but a reminder that salvation sometimes came from where we least expected, from creatures we thought were strangers. And that, in this vast world, trust, even fragile, could bridge impossible distances. The sky above the peak was perfectly clear. A light breeze swept past, carrying the faint, far-off sound of beating wings. Sarah stopped, closed her eyes, listened, and walked on.